I was an adult. And when they moved out, I think I was 19 years old when they moved out of that house, and I cried like a baby. I cried like a baby when they moved. And I was 18. I didn't even live there anymore. You know? It was a huge trauma to me. So a lot of times, there are so many similarities. Certain things change, but the more things change, the more they stay the same. So there's so many things that we need to remember what these kids are going through. Did you have a comment you wanted to make?
It was just similar to yours about, you said friendships were very important.
Oh, yeah.
I just remember that for myself coming into, as she said, 8th grade in a high school in Atlanta. All of the kids in 8th grade came from the feeder schools for that high school, and I did not. So they had already established friendships and, all that kind of stuff, and I was coming from another side of town. And so it makes me think about how transient our kids are, and some of them have been friends since first grade because they spent their whole elementary career together. They didn't move; their parents stayed in one location, and it's just interesting to see how things are different now.
Yeah. I tell folks, when I went to 7th grade, it was junior high then, I had come from a small elementary school. Everybody walked to school. We didn't have any school buses. We walked to school. And I got to junior high, and if you're familiar with High Point, North Carolina, in High Point, North Carolina, you either own the mill or you work in the mill. Well, my parents worked in the mills. All right. All of a sudden, because I was in the gifted classes, I was in class with all the kids whose parents owned the mills. I didn't know I was poor until I got to junior high and saw people wearing these fancy dresses and going to the country club and all this kind of stuff, and I'm like, get out of town. I thought that was really something. I had no idea that kind of stuff was going on, and I was out there with my horses and out in the field somewhere and everything, and all their moms picked them up in cars after school. All of us poor kids had to get on the bus and trek out to the boonies and everything, and I had no idea I was poor. That was I went home and said to my parents one time, I said, do you know that we are poor? My parents are like, well, I guess you could look at it that way. Is there something you need? There's something you don't have that you're supposed to have? Because I don't know what it is. But anyway.
One of the big things we didn't mention, and I know because with Atlanta, lecturers moving from one side to the other, and I told you, is immigration. For me, I went from an all African-American environment, and my mother thought, oh, I'm going to send you to this all-white school, because at that time, that's what she thought, that sending you to an all-white school would be better. And it was a culture shock.
Yeah.
You go in and see, I could count the number of African-American faces in a pep rally. And luckily, I went with my sister, so she and I, bonded, and that was my friend. But that's a culture shock. And I know for my daughter now, it's been a culture shock because I moved the same way. She has a difficult time.
Yeah. And I think we don't always think about that. The first school I taught in for 24 years was the African American, the black junior high. And what they did to integrate it was they sent in white teachers the first year. So it was all black kids, white teachers. And then they started bringing in some white kids to the school. And it was a real, that was at the time I was still over at the other junior high across town, which was integrated. And it was a big to-do. But I graduated from high school in 72. So we were still looking at, race issues. We were looking at walkouts. We used to have walkouts at school, all kinds of those kinds of things going on. And because I was poor, which I had now figured out that I was poor, and I was an athlete, I sort of hung out with a wide variety of kids. I hung out with the kids who were athletes, which I didn't care where they lived. It's just we all got off the same bus after the ball game and went our separate ways. But a lot of other kids didn't have those kinds of experiences. Here are today's kids that we're teaching. All right. The millennial generation. As I run through just a couple, I've got about 5 or 6 characteristics of these kids. As I run through this, simply think about how this compares. Can you say, yes, these are my kids, and is this your life that we're looking at? They've always been consulted. What would you like to do? That didn't happen when I was growing up. Okay? There'd be none of that. Okay? This is what we're doing. Why? Because I said so. Okay? But these kids have always been consulted. They've always had input. They've always had a voice. They've always had some choice. They expect that in schools. Here's one, and I thought about this. They've always known about diversity, or many of our kids have, okay? Now, I know in some of our urban settings that isn't the case, that kids are in schools. But, you know, I'm from Greensboro, North Carolina, all right? It's, you know, it's not an urban setting necessarily, but I mean, you know, lots and lots and lots of mixture, and not just black and white. I mean, you know, we have a large Asian population. You go to the eastern part of North Carolina, you have a large Native American population, and these kids think absolutely nothing about it. Give you another quick little story. We'll move on. At my wedding, my second wedding, yeah, this whole wedding thing is not working out all that well for me, but anyway. Whatever. I have other redeeming qualities, so I really do. I really do. I just can't quite do that married thing all that well. But anyway, my second wedding, my teammate at the time was going to sing at my wedding. Now, Harry, God, I love Harry to death. Harry is a very large man. Very large man. And now my grandmother was still living at the time, and my grandmother grew up on a farm. My grandparents were sharecroppers, grew up on a farm, no diversity whatsoever. And all of a sudden, from back behind the, whatever you call it there, Harry's going to sing the first song at my wedding. And I'm standing up there, and he rises up, sort of like a mountain coming up. And I hear my grandmother go, "Oh, he's black." And my mother says that I turned around with daggers in my eyes and looked at her like, and she told me later, she said, I didn't mean, I love him. He's one, and she was hugging him, and she said, I didn't mean to, I'm so embarrassed. She said, you just surprised me. And he said, it's okay. He said, he said something like, I surprise a lot of older white women or something like that. But anyway, you know, she had not grown up with that diversity. It was a shock to her. It wasn't a bad thing. It was just a shock. And you know how sometimes, and I know we've all gone through that multicultural training and all that kind of stuff, sometimes we get so busy tiptoeing around people that we just forget they're people. Just treat them like a person. Treat them like you'd treat anybody else. Treat them like you'd treat your child or your daughter or, I mean, your sister or your friend. And it makes a big difference. But that's our kids today. They want feedback. They are used to hearing things like, you did a nice job, this is what you did well. You know, I never knew any of that stuff. When I came home, I would say to my parents, I think I did okay, but I don't know. I'll get that test paper back in a week or two. And when it came back with a number at the top and nothing else. I didn't know what I'd done wrong. I didn't know what the deal was. Kids today are used to getting feedback, and they want it now. Have you ever given a test one period, and at the next passing, the kids stand outside the door saying, did you grade my test? You know, I was a little busy. I was like teaching these other people, and I didn't quite get around to that yet, but, you know, or they're meeting you at the door the next morning. Have you graded those tests yet? Those 120 essays you took home last night, have you gotten through all of those yet? You know, those kinds of things. They want feedback, and they want it now. And here's the kicker. They want to give you feedback too. Because they have always been consulted, they want to tell you, well, that was just a stupid idea. That didn't work out all that well, did it? You know, when you give them a project or something. So create those settings for them to do that. As part of my reflection on a lot of big assignments or those kinds of things, I'll say to the kids, when I give this assignment next year, what changes should I make? I'll let them give me some feedback. You know, but you have to be open to that, and you have to make sure your kids know there's a way to give that feedback to anyone. But you have to be open. How many of you at the end of the year have done some sort of a teacher or class or team evaluation where you ask your kids, what'd you think about it? Right. I've seen people who've actually done teacher report cards where you put down some things that you were hopeful you had done that year and literally let your kids give you a grade and give comments on it. Be careful. If you ask for feedback, you're going to get it. Okay? So be ready for it. But these kids, they're used to talking about what they're thinking. They are great collaborators, but they still need lots and lots and lots of structure. These kids have grown up playing sports together, doing all kinds of things together, but they still need structure. I've seen more teachers give up on cooperative learning activities or group activities because these kids just don't know how to do this. And they yell at each other. They did it. But I'll say, well, what structures did you put in place? You know, what were your rules? You know, I almost never let my kids do a group activity unless I said to them, let's do a quick reminder, what are the 4 things we need to keep in mind as we work in groups? And I wanted to hear every one of them. And then I could very simply say to somebody, why are you out of your seat? That was one of the rules. You know, just reminders. They need that kind of feedback. They see leadership as participative.